The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Buckingham Palace, as Camilla Parker Bowles stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the roses. She had been queen consort for nearly 2 years now, yet the weight of the crown still felt foreign on her head. The reflection staring back at her in the glass showed a woman in her 70s, lines of worry etched deeper than they had been just months before. The previous evening had been particularly difficult. Charles had retreated to his study after dinner, barely speaking a word to her throughout the meal. The silence between them had grown thicker over the past weeks, like a fog that refused to lift. She knew why, though neither of them had spoken about it directly. The public scrutiny had intensified, and the press had begun questioning her role more aggressively than ever before. Camilla turned away from the window and walked to her dressing table, where a stack of newspapers lay folded. Her lady-in-waiting, Margaret, had placed them there despite knowing how much they upset her. The headlines were brutal, as they always were. Questions about her legitimacy, her past, her worthiness to stand beside the king. Each word felt like a small cut, and over time, these cuts had accumulated into deep wounds. She remembered when she first met Charles all those years ago. They were both young then, full of hope and passion. The world seemed simpler, their love uncomplicated by duty and protocol. But life had other plans. Diana had entered their lives like a beautiful storm, capturing not just Charles's hand in marriage but the hearts of the entire world. Camilla had stepped back, married Andrew Parker Bowles, and tried to build a life away from the spotlight. Yet destiny has a way of bringing people back together. After Diana's tragic death, after years of secret meetings and whispered phone calls, she and Charles had finally been able to be together openly. The wedding in 2005 had been a quiet affair, nothing like the fairy tale spectacle that Diana's had been. Camilla had understood then that she would always be the second choice, the woman who came after the beloved princess. Now, as queen consort, she faced challenges she had never anticipated. The role demanded perfection, grace under pressure, and an almost superhuman ability to ignore criticism. Some days she felt strong enough to handle it all. Other days, like today, the weight of it all threatened to crush her spirit entirely. Margaret knocked softly on the door before entering. She was a kind woman in her 60s who had served the royal family for over 3 decades. Her loyalty was unwavering, but her eyes often reflected concern for Camilla's well-being. "Your Majesty," Margaret said quietly, "the king is asking for you in his study." Camilla's heart sank slightly. Charles only summoned her to his study when something serious needed discussing. She nodded to Margaret and made her way through the palace corridors, her heels clicking softly on the marble floors. Palace staff bowed respectfully as she passed, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was racing with possibilities of what Charles might want to discuss. The study door was heavy oak, and she knocked gently before entering. Charles sat behind his massive desk, surrounded by papers and official documents. He looked older than his years, the stress of kingship having aged him rapidly since his mother's death. When he looked up at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten with dread. "Camilla," he said, his voice formal and distant. "Please sit down." She took the chair across from his desk, the same chair where she had sat countless times over the years during happier conversations. The distance between them felt enormous, though it was only a few feet of polished wood. "The Prime Minister visited yesterday," Charles began, not meeting her eyes directly. "There have been discussions about the monarchy's future, about public perception, about what's best for the institution." Camilla felt her breath catch in her throat. She had feared this conversation for months, but hearing it begin still felt like a physical blow. The room seemed to grow smaller around her as she waited for him to continue. "The polls have been concerning," he went on, shuffling papers unnecessarily. "The public's acceptance of you as queen consort has not improved as we had hoped. If anything, it has declined since the coronation." She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to remind him of all the charitable work she had done, all the duties she had fulfilled with dedication and grace. But the words stuck in her throat. She had given everything to this role, to this man, to this institution that seemed determined to reject her no matter how hard she tried. Charles finally looked at her directly, and she saw pain in his eyes that matched her own. This was not easy for him either, she realized, but that knowledge did little to comfort her. The man she had loved for decades, The man she had waited for through years of separation and scandal was about to break her heart in a way she had never imagined possible. "What are you saying, Charles?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of London traffic, the normal world continuing its daily rhythm while her world prepared to shatter into pieces. The golden afternoon light streaming through the window suddenly felt harsh and unforgiving. Charles opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. She watched him struggle with words that would change both their lives forever. In that moment, she realized that sometimes love was not enough to overcome the crushing weight of duty and public expectation. The bonds that had held them together through decades of challenges were about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. And deep in her heart, Camilla already knew that this test might be the one that finally broke them apart completely. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Charles had finally spoken the unthinkable, and Camilla felt as though the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white as she tried to process what he had just told her. "A separation," she repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "You want us to separate." Charles stood up from behind his desk and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The gesture was so familiar to her, something he did when he was deeply troubled. She had seen him stand this way countless times over the years, but never when the trouble was about their relationship. "It would be temporary," he said, without turning around. "Just until the public sentiment changes. The advisors believe that if you step back from royal duties for a while, perhaps travel abroad, the criticism might die down." Camilla laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter and sharp in the quiet room. "Step back? Charles, I am your wife. I am the queen consort. How exactly does one step back from that?" Now he did turn around, and she saw the anguish written across his face. This was destroying him too, she realized. But somehow that made it worse rather than better. If he was willing to put them both through this pain, then the pressure from his advisors and the government must be enormous. "The marriage would remain intact," he said quietly. "This would be a private arrangement. Publicly, we would say you are taking time for personal reasons, perhaps health concerns. Many would understand that." "Health concerns," she repeated, standing up slowly. Her legs felt unsteady. But she needed to be on her feet for this conversation. "So I am to pretend to be ill to save your throne?" The accusation hit its mark. Charles flinched as if she had slapped him. "It is not just my throne, Camilla. It is the monarchy itself, the institution that has guided this country for over 1,000 years. We have a responsibility that goes beyond our personal desires." She walked to the same window where he had been standing, looking out at the gardens where tourists gathered daily to catch a glimpse of royal life. How many of those people hated her? How many would celebrate if they knew about this conversation? "I have given everything to this institution," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I have endured decades of public hatred, comparisons to Diana that I could never win, accusations that I destroyed a marriage that was already broken. I have smiled through it all, attended every function, supported every cause, and been the perfect royal wife. And now you want me to disappear because it is politically convenient?" Charles moved closer to her, and for a moment she thought he might reach out to touch her. But he stopped just short, the distance between them feeling symbolic of the chasm that was opening in their relationship. "You know I do not want this," he said. "You know how much you mean to me. But the Prime Minister has made it clear that my reign is in jeopardy if something does not change soon. The Commonwealth realms are already questioning their allegiance. Canada and Australia are considering removing me as their head of state. If we lose them what?" Camilla turned to face him fully. "The monarchy will survive. It has survived worse scandals than a queen who is unpopular. Your great-uncle abdicated for love, and the institution continued. Your mother weathered the divorce, Diana's death, your father's affairs. The monarchy is stronger than you think." But even as she said the words, she could see in his eyes that he did not believe them. The weight of being king had changed him in ways she had not fully understood until now. The man who had once been willing to risk everything for their love had been replaced by someone who put duty above all else. "The circumstances are different now," he said. "The world has changed. Social media, 24-hour news cycles, public opinion polls. Everything is scrutinized in ways it never was before. One wrong move, one scandal too many, and centuries of tradition could crumble. Camilla felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not while they were still in the middle of this impossible conversation. So I am to be the sacrifice, she said. The woman who loves you too much to destroy you, so she destroys herself instead. Charles stepped forward then, finally closing the distance between them. He reached out to take her hands, but she pulled away. The rejection hurt both of them, but she could not bear his touch while he was asking her to leave. It would not be forever, he said desperately. Perhaps a year, maybe 2. Long enough for people to forget, for new stories to capture their attention. Then you could return and we could be together again. A year or 2, she repeated. Charles, we are not young anymore. At our age, a year or 2 might be all we have left. You are asking me to give up the precious time we have remaining for a gamble that the public might someday accept me. He had no answer for that, and his silence spoke volumes. In that moment, Camilla understood that this was not really about public opinion or political pressure. This was about Charles choosing the crown over their love, just as he had chosen duty over love so many times before. The realization hit her like a physical blow. After all these years, after everything they had been through together, she was still secondary to his royal obligations. She had always known it intellectually, but feeling it emotionally was devastating. I need time to think, she said, moving toward the door. Camilla, please, Charles called after her. We can work this out. We can find a solution that works for everyone. She stopped with her hand on the door handle but did not turn around. The solution you have proposed works for everyone except me, Charles. I wonder if you have considered that. As she walked back through the palace corridors, Camilla felt as though she was seeing everything for the last time. The portraits of previous monarchs seemed to watch her with judgmental eyes, and the opulent surroundings that had once felt like home now felt like a beautiful prison from which she was about to be exiled. The next 3 days passed in a blur of strained conversations and careful avoidance. Camilla went through the motions of her royal duties like an actress playing a role she no longer believed in. She attended a charity luncheon for literacy programs, smiled for photographs at a hospital opening, and hosted a reception for visiting diplomats. Through it all, she felt hollow inside, as though part of her soul had been carved out and left in Charles's study. Charles, for his part, threw himself into his work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He scheduled back-to-back meetings, extended his daily briefings, and even requested additional parliamentary sessions. It was his way of avoiding the emotional reality of what he had asked of her, but Camilla saw through the facade. She knew him too well after all these years. Margaret had noticed the change in both of them immediately. The older woman had served enough royals to recognize the signs of a marriage in crisis, but she was too well trained and too loyal to ask direct questions. Instead, she hovered nearby with increased frequency, bringing tea that went untouched and suggesting schedule changes that might bring the couple together. On the 4th morning, Camilla made her decision. She woke before dawn and sat in her sitting room, watching the sunrise paint the London sky in shades of pink and gold. The beauty of the moment felt cruel given the darkness of her thoughts, but it also gave her a strange sense of clarity. She had spent her entire adult life loving Charles, and much of that time had been spent waiting for him to be free to marry her, waiting for public acceptance, waiting for their love to be enough to overcome every obstacle. She was tired of waiting for a future that might never come. The queen consort picked up her private phone and dialed a number she had not called in months. Her sister Annabelle answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. Camilla? Good heavens, what time is it? I need to see you, Camilla said without preamble. Can you come to the palace today? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Annabelle had always been able to read her sister's moods, even over the phone. What's happened? I will explain when you arrive. But Annabelle, I need you to book a flight to France as well. For both of us. Another pause, longer this time. How long will we be staying? Camilla looked around her sitting room, taking in the expensive furnishings and priceless artwork that had never really felt like hers. I am not certain we will be coming back. Annabelle arrived 3 hours later, her face creased with worry. She was 2 years younger than Camilla, but looked older today, as though she had aged during the short flight from her country home. The sisters embraced tightly, and for the first time in days, Camilla felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Tell me everything, Annabel said, settling into the chair across from her sister. So Camilla did. She explained about the meeting with Charles, about the pressure from his advisors, about the impossible choice she was being asked to make. Annabel listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "He actually asked you to leave," Annabel said when Camilla finished. "After everything you have been through together. He framed it as a temporary separation, but we both know better. Once I leave, once the precedent is set that I can be discarded when politically convenient, there will always be another crisis that requires my absence." Annabel stood up and began pacing, a habit she had inherited from their father. "What about your duties? Your patronages? The charities that depend on your support? They will find someone else. They always do." Camilla's voice was flat, emotionless. She had already thought through all of these practical concerns. "The monarchy survived without me for centuries. It will survive without me again. But what about you? What will you do?" For the first time in the conversation, Camilla smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it held a hint of something that might eventually become happiness. "I will remember who I was before I became queen consort. I will travel, read books that are not briefing papers, have conversations that are not diplomatic. I will live without protocol and duty and public scrutiny." Annabel stopped pacing and looked at her sister carefully. "And Charles? Do you still love him?" The question hung in the air between them. Camilla had been asking herself the same thing for days, and the answer was complicated. Did she love the man who had asked her to sacrifice herself for his crown? Or did she love the memory of who he used to be? "I love who we were together," she said finally. "But that couple no longer exists. The king who sits on the throne is not the same man I fell in love with 40 years ago. And the woman who agreed to marry him despite knowing she would always be second to his duty. I am not sure I want to be her anymore." The sisters spent the rest of the day making practical arrangements. Annabel handled the travel bookings while Camilla sorted through her personal belongings. She would take very little, just enough clothes for a few weeks and some jewelry that had belonged to their mother. Everything else would stay behind, including the magnificent engagement ring Charles had given her and the wedding band that had symbolized their supposedly unbreakable bond. As evening approached, Camilla knew she had to tell Charles about her decision before someone else discovered their travel plans. She found him in the drawing room, reading through state papers while classical music played softly in the background. The scene was so familiar, so reminiscent of countless quiet evenings they had shared, that she almost lost her resolve. "Charles," she said quietly from the doorway. He looked up, and for a moment his face brightened as though he had forgotten about their conversation in his study. Then reality crashed back and his expression became guarded. "I have made my decision," she continued, stepping into the room but not approaching him. "I will do as you ask. I will leave." Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by something that looked like regret. "Camilla, I know this is difficult, but it really is for the best. Once things settle down—" "No," she interrupted. "You misunderstand. I am not leaving temporarily. I am leaving permanently. Our marriage is over, Charles." The state papers scattered to the floor as he stood up abruptly. "You cannot mean that. We can work through this. We always have before. Before we were fighting external forces. This time the obstacle is you. You have chosen your crown over our love, and I refuse to spend what remains of my life waiting for you to choose differently." The music continued playing in the background, a Mozart symphony that mocked the destruction happening in the elegant room. Charles moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I leave tomorrow morning," she said. "Please do not make this harder than it already is." The morning of her departure dawned gray and drizzling, as though London itself was mourning her decision. Camilla stood at the window of her bedroom for the last time, watching the rain streak down the glass. She had barely slept, but she felt strangely alert, as though a weight she had carried for years was finally being lifted from her shoulders. Margaret had been heartbroken when told of the Queen Consort's decision. The loyal lady-in-waiting had served Camilla faithfully through all the difficult years, and now she was losing not just an employer but a friend. She helped pack the small suitcase in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her efforts to remain professional. "Your Majesty," Margaret said as they finished, "are you certain about this? Perhaps if you spoke with the king again." Camilla took the older woman's hands in hers. "Margaret, You have been more than a servant to me. You have been a true friend. But this decision is final. I cannot continue to live a life where my very existence is seen as a threat to the institution I have tried so hard to serve. But where will you go? How will we reach you? I will contact you once I am settled, Camilla promised. And Margaret, please know that leaving you behind is one of the hardest parts of this decision. Downstairs, Annabelle waited in the car that would take them to the airport. She had arranged everything through private channels to avoid media attention. The plan was simple. They would fly to Paris, then drive to a small chateau in the Loire Valley that belonged to one of Annabelle's friends. There, Camilla could disappear from public view while she decided what to do with the rest of her life. Charles appeared in the entrance hall just as Camilla was preparing to leave. He looked as though he had not slept either, his face haggard, and his usually perfect appearance disheveled. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the marble floor, decades of shared history stretching between them. Camilla, please, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Do not do this, we can find another way. She walked toward him slowly, carrying only her small handbag. When she reached him, she placed her hand gently on his cheek, a gesture that had comforted him countless times over the years. Charles, my darling, she said softly, there is no other way. You have made your choice, and now I am making mine. We both knew this day might come eventually. I never wanted this, he whispered, covering her hand with his own. I love you. I have always loved you. I know, she replied, and the sadness in her voice was infinite. But love was never enough for us, was it? There was always something else, something more important. First it was duty to your mother, then duty to the country, now duty to the monarchy itself. I am tired of coming second to duty. She pulled her hand away and stepped back. The distance between them felt final, like a door closing that would never open again. The press will ask questions, Charles said desperately, grasping for practical concerns to avoid the emotional reality. What shall I tell them? Tell them the truth, Camilla replied. Tell them that sometimes even queens reach their breaking point. She turned and walked toward the door without looking back. Each step felt like a small victory and a small death at the same time. Behind her, she heard Charles call her name one last time, but she did not stop. If she turned around now, if she saw the pain in his eyes again, she might lose her resolve entirely. The car ride to the airport was silent. Annabelle seemed to understand that her sister needed time to process what had just happened. As they drove through London streets, Camilla looked out at the city that had been her home for so many years. She saw tourists taking photographs of Buckingham Palace in the distance, unaware that inside its walls, a love story that had lasted decades was finally coming to an end. At the airport, they boarded a private jet that Annabelle had chartered. The flight attendant was discreet and professional, asking no questions about the identity of her passengers. As the plane lifted off from English soil, Camilla felt something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she was not the queen consort. She was not Charles's wife. She was simply Camilla Parker Bowles, a woman starting over at 76 years old. The flight to Paris took just over an hour, but it felt like a journey to another world. France had always been a refuge for her, a place where she could relax and be herself without the constant pressure of royal protocol. As they descended toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, she caught sight of the Eiffel Tower in the distance and felt a spark of something that might eventually become excitement. The chateau in the Loire Valley was everything Annabelle had promised. It was small and charming, surrounded by vineyards and rolling hills. The owner, Marie-Claire Dubois, was a childhood friend of Annabelle's who asked no questions and offered complete discretion. She showed them to their rooms and left them to settle in with typical French understanding of the need for privacy. That evening, the sisters sat on the terrace overlooking the gardens, sharing a bottle of local wine as the sun set over the countryside. For the first time in days, Camilla felt truly peaceful. The silence here was different from the tense quiet that had filled the palace. This was the silence of possibility, of freedom, of a life yet to be defined. Do you regret it? Annabelle asked as they watched the stars begin to appear. Camilla considered the question carefully. Did she regret leaving behind the man she had loved for most of her adult life? Did she regret walking away from a position that millions of women would envy? Did she regret choosing her own happiness over duty and tradition? No, she said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I regret that it took me so long to realize I deserved better. I regret the years I spent believing that love meant accepting whatever scraps of attention and respect were thrown my way. But I do not regret leaving. As if to underscore her words, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw Charles's name on the screen. The message was simple. Please come home. Camilla looked at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Home was no longer a place where she was merely tolerated. Home was wherever she could be herself without apology. The queen consort was gone. In her place sat a woman who was finally ready to discover who she could become when she stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted her to be. The transformation was just beginning, but already she could feel herself changing like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon she had outgrown long ago. 3 weeks into her self-imposed exile, Camilla had settled into a routine that felt both foreign and wonderfully liberating. She woke each morning without an alarm, had coffee on the terrace while reading French novels, and spent her afternoons walking through the nearby village or helping Marie Claire in her garden. For the first time in decades, her days belonged entirely to her. The media had finally discovered her disappearance, though the palace had managed to keep her exact location secret. The official statement claimed she was taking time for personal health reasons, just as Charles had suggested during their devastating conversation. The speculation was wild and largely inaccurate, but Camilla found that she cared less about public opinion with each passing day. Annabelle had returned to England after the first week, promising to visit again soon and to keep Camilla informed about the situation back home. The reports she brought were troubling. Charles had thrown himself even deeper into his work, accepting every engagement and extending every meeting. The press was having a field day with theories about the queen consort's absence, and several unnamed palace sources had begun leaking increasingly dramatic stories. On this particular morning, Camilla was surprised to find Marie Claire waiting for her on the terrace with coffee and an expression of gentle concern. "You have a visitor," Marie Claire said in accented English. "A gentleman from London? He is waiting in the drawing room." Camilla's heart lurched. Had Charles come after her? Part of her hoped he had, while another part dreaded the conversation that would follow. She made her way to the drawing room, steeling herself for whatever awaited her. But it was not Charles who stood by the window looking out at the gardens. It was Sir Clive Alderton, Charles's private secretary and one of the most powerful men in the royal household. His presence here meant this was not a personal visit but an official one. "Sir Clive," Camilla said, maintaining her composure despite her surprise. "This is unexpected." He turned from the window and bowed slightly, though his formal manner seemed out of place in the casual elegance of the French chateau. "Your Majesty, I apologize for arriving unannounced, but the matter is urgent." "I am no longer Your Majesty," Camilla said firmly. "I am simply Mrs. Parker Bowles now. Please sit down and tell me why you have come." Sir Clive looked uncomfortable with her correction but took the offered seat. He was a career civil servant who had served the royal family for over 20 years, and Camilla had always respected his dedication and discretion. His presence here suggested that the situation in London was far worse than Annabelle had indicated. "The king has sent me to ask you to return," he began formally. "The situation has become complicated." Camilla settled into the chair across from him, noting how strange it felt to be addressed as anything other than royalty. "In what way complicated?" "Your absence has created more problems than it solved. The press coverage has been relentless, and the speculation is damaging the monarchy more than your presence ever did. There are questions about the stability of the king's marriage, about his ability to make sound decisions under pressure. And," Camilla prompted when he paused, "several Commonwealth realms have officially requested explanations about the queen consort's health and expected return to duties. Canada and Australia are particularly concerned. The Prime Minister has indicated that your continued absence could accelerate their movements toward republicanism." Camilla listened to this recitation of crisis with a growing sense of irony. Her leaving was supposed to solve these exact problems, not make them worse. So Charles's plan has backfired. Sir Clive shifted uncomfortably. The king deeply regrets the circumstances that led to your departure. He has asked me to convey that he is willing to discuss any arrangements that might make your return possible. Any arrangements? Camilla raised an eyebrow. How generous of him. The sarcasm was not lost on Sir Clive, though he maintained his professional demeanor. Your Majesty, Mrs. Parker Bowles, I have served the royal family long enough to recognize when the institution is truly threatened. This is one of those times. The monarchy needs you to return. The monarchy, Camilla repeated. Not Charles. Not my husband. The institution. Both, I believe. Camilla stood and walked to the window where Sir Clive had been standing when she arrived. The view was peaceful, rolling hills dotted with sheep and crossed by stone walls that had stood for centuries. It was so different from the manicured perfection of the palace gardens, yet somehow more beautiful in its simplicity. What exactly is Charles offering? She asked without turning around. Full restoration of your role and duties, a public statement affirming your importance to the monarchy, and a commitment that your position will never again be questioned or compromised. Words, Camilla said dismissively. Charles has always been good with words. But what about actions? What guarantee do I have that the next time public opinion turns against me, he will not ask me to disappear again? Sir Clive was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, less official. Mrs. Parker Bowles, I have watched you serve this family with grace and dignity for many years. I have also watched the king struggle with the impossible balance between personal happiness and royal duty. He made a mistake, a terrible one, but he is trying to fix it. Some mistakes cannot be fixed, Camilla replied. Some words once spoken cannot be taken back. Perhaps not. But some relationships are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. Camilla turned to look at him, surprised by the personal nature of his comments. Sir Clive was not known for emotional appeals or personal opinions. His willingness to speak this way suggested that the situation was even more dire than he had initially indicated. How is he? She asked quietly. Devastated. He barely eats, rarely sleeps. He has aged years in the weeks since you left. The man who was crowned king with such ceremony and pride has become a shadow of himself. Despite everything, Camilla felt a pang of sympathy for Charles. She knew him well enough to understand how her departure must be affecting him. He had never been good at dealing with personal failure, and losing her would feel like the ultimate rejection of everything he had tried to build. And if I refuse to return? She asked. Sir Clive looked grave. I believe it would mark the beginning of the end of the modern monarchy. Without you, the king cannot fulfill his role effectively. The institution that has guided this nation for over 1,000 years could crumble within a generation. The weight of that responsibility settled on Camilla's shoulders like a familiar burden. All her life she had been asked to sacrifice for the greater good, to put duty before personal happiness. Even now, even after breaking free, she was being asked to do it again. But something had changed during her weeks in France. She had remembered who she was beyond her titles and obligations. She had tasted freedom and found it intoxicating. The woman who might once have immediately agreed to return for the sake of duty was no longer the same person. I need time to consider your request, she said finally. Sir Clive nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. Of course. How long do you need? I will give you my answer tomorrow morning. After he left, Camilla spent the rest of the day walking through the French countryside, thinking about the impossible choice she faced. Return to a life where she would always be vulnerable to political pressures, or stay away and watch the monarchy she had served crumble from a distance. Neither option felt like a victory. That evening, as Camilla sat alone on the terrace with a glass of wine, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized but had not expected to see. It was William, Charles's eldest son and heir to the throne. William, she answered, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Camilla, he said, and she could hear the strain in his voice even across the distance. I hope you do not mind me calling directly. Of course not. How did you get this number? Sir Clive, he told me about his visit today. There was a pause. Camilla, I know our relationship has been complicated over the years, but I need to speak with you honestly. She waited, uncertain what to expect. William had never been openly hostile to her, but their relationship had always been cordial rather than warm. Diana's death had created a barrier between them that neither had ever fully addressed. I was angry when I learned what my father asked of you, William continued. Furious, actually. Catherine had to talk me out of driving to the palace and telling him exactly what I thought of his decision. This admission surprised Camilla. She had assumed that William, focused as he was on the monarchy's future, would have supported Charles's choice to prioritize political stability over personal relationships. I appreciate that, William, but your father was trying to protect the institution you will inherit. He was thinking of your future. No, William said firmly. He was scared and he made a terrible decision. The monarchy's strength has never come from perfection, Camilla. It has come from our ability to evolve, to show that we are human while still serving something greater than ourselves. Camilla felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. These were words she had never expected to hear from William, certainly not in defense of her. My father loves you, he continued. I have watched him for years, and I have never seen him as happy as he has been with you. The man who has thrown himself into duty since you left is not the king this country needs. He is going through the motions, but his heart is not in it anymore. William, I appreciate what you are saying, but the situation is more complicated than that. The public, the government, they do not want me there. Then we change their minds together. His voice grew stronger, more determined. Camilla, I am going to be king someday, God willing, not for many years yet. But when that day comes, I want to lead a monarchy that stands for something real. I want to show that duty and love can coexist, that serving the people does not require destroying the people who serve. Camilla was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected support. What are you asking of me? Come home. Not because duty demands it, but because we need you. George, Charlotte, and Louis need their step-grandmother. Catherine needs your guidance as she prepares for her future role. The country needs to see that the monarchy can weather personal storms and emerge stronger. And your father? My father needs his wife. Not the queen consort performing her duties, but the woman he has loved for 40 years. The man I have watched these past weeks is broken, Camilla. Whatever happened between you, whatever he said or did, it is destroying him. After William hung up, Camilla sat in the growing darkness, thinking about everything that had been said. The conversation had shifted something fundamental in her understanding of the situation. For weeks, she had framed this as a choice between personal happiness and duty, but perhaps it was more complex than that. The next morning, she called Sir Clive to her room at the chateau. He arrived promptly, clearly hoping for good news but trying to maintain professional composure. I will return, she said without preamble, but not as the same person who left, and not under the same conditions. Relief flooded his features, but he waited for her to continue. If I am to be queen consort, then I will be treated as an equal partner in the marriage and in the monarchy. No more request to disappear when things become difficult. No more treating me as expendable when political pressures mount. Of course, Sir Clive agreed quickly. The king has already indicated his complete agreement to such terms. I am not finished, Camilla said firmly. I also want a formal role in preparing Catherine for her future as queen. And I want regular meetings with the communications team to ensure that my public image is properly supported, not left to chance or hostile media narrative. Sir Clive nodded, making notes. All reasonable requests. Finally, Camilla continued, I want Charles to ask me himself, not through intermediaries, not through official channels. If he wants me back, he needs to come here and ask me personally. This request clearly surprised Sir Clive. Your Majesty, the king cannot simply leave the country without extensive planning and security arrangements. Then he will have to decide how badly he wants me to return, Camilla replied. Those are my terms. 2 days later, Camilla was reading in the garden when Marie-Claire appeared with a familiar expression of amused confusion. You have another visitor from London, she said. This one I think you will want to see. Camilla looked up to see Charles walking toward her across the lawn, looking more uncertain than she had ever seen him. He was dressed simply in slacks and a sweater, without any of the formal trappings of kingship. For a moment, he looked like the young man she had fallen in love with decades ago. She closed her book but remained seated, watching him approach. When he reached her chair, he stopped and stood awkwardly as though unsure of his welcome. Hello, Camilla, he said quietly. Charles, she replied, her voice neutral. May I sit down? She gestured to the empty chair beside her. As he settled himself, she noticed how much weight he had lost, how tired he looked. The past weeks had taken a toll on him that was clearly visible. I have come to ask you to return. he said, looking directly at her for the first time since arriving. Not because the monarchy needs you, though it does. Not because the advisors think it is politically necessary, though they do. I am asking because I need you. Because I have realized that being king without you is meaningless. Camilla studied his face, searching for sincerity. You asked me to leave, Charles. You chose your crown over our marriage. I made the worst mistake of my life, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I was scared and overwhelmed, and I let other people convince me that love was a luxury I could not afford. I was wrong. Love is not a luxury, Camilla. It is the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile. The words she had longed to hear hung in the air between them, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious about accepting promises too quickly. How do I know you will not ask me to leave again the next time there is a crisis? She asked. Charles leaned forward in his chair, reaching for her hands. This time she did not pull away. Because I have learned something these past weeks, he said. A king without love is just a man with a crown. And a man with a crown but no soul is no king at all. The tears that Camilla had held back for weeks finally came. They flowed silently down her cheeks as she looked at the man she had loved for most of her adult life, the man who had broken her heart and was now trying to mend it. Charles reached up gently to wipe away her tears, and she did not stop him. I need more than words this time, she said through her tears. I need to know that you understand what you put me through. I need to know that you choose me, not just as queen consort, but as your wife, your partner, your equal. I do, Charles said without hesitation. Camilla, I choose you. I choose us. I choose love over fear, over duty, over everything else. I should have made that choice weeks ago, and I will regret my cowardice for the rest of my life. They sat in silence for several minutes, holding hands in the French garden, while decades of shared history settled around them like fallen leaves. The hurt was still there, sharp and real, but beneath it Camilla could feel the foundation of their love, damaged but not destroyed. If I return, she said finally, things will be different. I will not be the quiet, accommodating wife who disappears when convenient. I will not smile through public humiliation or pretend that duty matters more than dignity. Good, Charles said, surprising her. The woman I fell in love with was never quiet or accommodating. I do not want you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. The press will be brutal. They will see my return as proof that I manipulated you, that I am power-hungry and controlling. Let them think what they want, Charles replied. We know the truth. Our children know the truth. History will know the truth. Camilla looked around the peaceful garden one last time, knowing that she was about to leave this sanctuary and return to a world of constant scrutiny and pressure, but she was not the same woman who had fled London in tears and desperation. These weeks of freedom had reminded her of her own strength, her own worth. She would not be returning as a victim, but as a woman who knew her value and would accept nothing less than the respect she deserved. When do we leave? She asked. Charles's face broke into the first genuine smile she had seen from him in months. Whenever you are ready. I have a jet waiting at the airport. Of course you do, she said, and for the first time in weeks she laughed. The flight back to London was quiet but comfortable. They sat side by side, not saying much but simply being together in a way that felt both familiar and new. Camilla watched the English countryside appear below them as they descended, and she felt a complex mixture of anticipation and dread. The palace staff lined up to welcome her back, and Camilla was touched by the genuine warmth in their faces. Margaret was there, tears streaming down her cheeks as she curtsied deeply. Even the normally stoic footmen seemed emotional as they bowed. These people had become her family over the years, and their joy at her return reminded her that she had not been fighting for acceptance alone. That evening, Charles made a formal announcement about the Queen Consort's return to health and duties. The statement was brief and revealed nothing about the true nature of her absence, but it was enough to quiet the immediate speculation. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as they worked to rebuild not just their marriage but their public image. The first public appearance was at a charity gala 3 days later. Camilla spent extra time preparing, choosing a deep blue gown that made her feel confident and strong. As they walked into the venue together, she felt the familiar flash of cameras and heard the murmur of conversation that always accompanied their arrivals. But something was different this time. Charles kept her hand firmly in his throughout the evening, and when they spoke to guests, he repeatedly referred to their partnership, their shared commitment to the causes they supported. The message was clear. They were presenting themselves as a united team, and anyone who questioned her place beside him would have to deal with both of them. The press coverage the next day was mixed, as expected. Some outlets celebrated the royal couple's apparent reconciliation, while others questioned the circumstances of her absence and return. But Camilla found that she cared less about the headlines than she once had. Her weeks in France had given her perspective on what truly mattered. 6 months later, Camilla stood at the same window where this journey had begun, watching the gardeners tend to the roses in the early morning light. But everything had changed. She was no longer the uncertain woman who had watched her world crumble around her. She was the queen consort who had walked away from the monarchy and returned on her own terms. Her relationship with Charles had been rebuilt on a stronger foundation. They talked more openly now about the pressures they faced and the decisions they needed to make together. He consulted her on important matters not just as a courtesy, but as a genuine partner whose opinion he valued and trusted. The public's acceptance of her had not transformed overnight, but it had gradually improved. Her willingness to leave when she was not respected had, paradoxically, earned her more respect than years of patient endurance ever had. People began to see her not as a woman clinging to power, but as someone who had fought for her dignity and won. Margaret entered the room quietly, bringing the morning tea and newspapers as she had done countless times before. But now there was a lightness in her step that had been missing during those dark weeks. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Margaret said with a warm smile. "You have a lovely day ahead. The children's literacy event this morning. Lunch with the Australian High Commissioner and then tea with Princess Catherine." "Thank you, Margaret," Camilla replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "It sounds perfect." As Margaret left, Camilla reflected on how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. She was still queen consort, still bound by duty and protocol, still subject to public scrutiny and criticism. But she was also still herself, perhaps more authentically than she had ever been. The tears that had once echoed through the palace halls in despair had been replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing her own worth. She had broken the bonds that held her to an impossible standard, and forged new ones based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The final bond that had broken that day in Charles's study was not the one that held them together, but the one that had held her back. In losing everything she thought she needed, Camilla had found everything she had never known she deserved. As she prepared to face another day of royal duties, she carried with her the knowledge that she was no longer just surviving her role as queen consort. She was thriving in it on her own terms, with her dignity intact and her voice finally heard. The woman who had once wept in silence now spoke with authority. The queen who had once begged for acceptance now commanded respect. And the love that had nearly been destroyed by duty had emerged stronger, deeper and more honest than ever before. In the end, Camilla's tears had not been a sign of defeat, but the first notes of a song of liberation that would echo through the palace halls for years to come.